Hi everybody, welcome to Dulcimerica. My name is Futch. Thank you for joining me. Yeah, it's about time I change these boogers because they are, well, they're nasty. I don't know when the last time I changed these strings was. But I want you to remember that sound because it's going to be significantly different after I change them here for you on an episode because I've gotten a lot of questions about strings. And so here's the thing about strings. There's a lot of things about strings. Let's get into it. First thing I want to show you, though, is while these old things are still on here, and these strings have been on here for about, I'm embarrassed to admit, probably about 3 months or so. I haven't been doing any performing. I've been teaching, so sometimes I get a little lax. It's not hard to change your strings. It's not a bad idea to change them often. And the number one question is, when should I change my strings? And there's a couple of different ways of looking at that. One is how often do you play and how well do you take care of your strings while they're on the instrument. Either way, they do reach a point where after being exposed to the air and your fingers, they just get nasty and it's time to get rid of them. So for me, I like to change them about every 2 or 3 weeks, but you may not play as much and you might take awesome care of your strings and maybe you could go about a month, but I'd say roughly a month is the average that you should keep a set of strings on there before changing them to get that nice clean sound. Let me show you something. First of all, there's this whole strum. And that will change when I put the new strings on. But check out my melody string. Hear that overtone that happens after I pluck the string? That is a byproduct of a string that has got a lot of grease and dirt and junk on it, and it's a little tarnished from being exposed to the air, and it's just not doing the thing it's supposed to be doing the best it possibly could. So I realized after a couple of videos that it's about time for me to change these out of here. And while I do it, not only will I show you how to change your strings, but also give you some information about purchasing strings, what strings are made of, some of the science involved to give you a better understanding so you are well equipped to do your own string shopping. So for changing strings, some things I recognize that are good to have. Your wire cutters. A string winder makes things a lot easier. Of course, a tuner of some sort. And of course, your strings themselves. Now, a lot of people will buy Dulcimer strings in Dulcimer packs. And this is fine and this works, but many people have different needs. They have different touches, they want a different feel for their instrument, and there are different things that you can do as far as the type of gauge you're using or the thickness of the string, and how many strings you're going to use, the materials, and all that sort of thing. So I often find that the Dulcimer packs are very limiting in what they can offer. And if you're looking to experiment with different types of strings, the good thing to do is buy them in individual packs. And you can get them in just packs of one, like this right here. Or if you know you like a particular type of string, then you can get them in bulk, like these from Fullcraft, so that you don't run out. I also like shopping at juststrings.com. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the strings off of here and talk a little bit about the science of a string on an acoustic instrument. I'm going to use the tuning peg. I'm going to take my time and not use the string winder at the moment. All right, I'll start taking these off of here. The first thing to think about is scale length. The scale length equals the distance between the nut and the bridge. So that's the nut right here. That's the bridge down here. And the string vibrates in between those two areas. The scale length is also called VSL, or vibrating string length. For a guitar, the average length of that scale is going to be 24 to 25 inches. For a dulcimer, it's 27 to 28 inches. And of course, you can go higher and you can go lower than that. The longer the string, or the longer the scale length rather, the more distance you've got in between the frets. And the shorter the scale length, the less amount of distance between frets. So if you've got small hands, you want to go with a short scale length as opposed to a long one. Also, the longer the string is, the more tension you need on that string to reach full pitch for it to actually sound good on your instrument. Now, as far as gauges are concerned, I'm taking the bass string off here right now, and I think I will use my string winder. It just goes right on the edge of your tuning gear, and then you can roll that sucker like this. And instead of having to roll it all the way off, once you get enough slack where the string is off the fretboard, you can just unwrap it there. And then, of course, that is where it connects to the headstock and the tuning gears, and down below here is where it attaches just below the bridge. And you might have, or you probably will have, two different types, or one of two different types of connectors. These down here are posts. When I remove the string, you can see the post right there. And if you have these little tiny posts that are just about the same circumference as the ball at the end of the string, then you're going to use ball end strings. You can also use loop end strings and just hook the loop around that post. But you might also have a dulcimer that is a little older, or has big posts down below at the tailpiece of the instrument, at which point the ball end strings won't fit over the edge or around the post itself, so a loop end string will work. So I'm going to go ahead and loosen this up, again using the string winder. So the string I just took off of there is about a 26, 28. I've been going back and forth between that. The thicker your string is, and the longer your string is, the lower the pitch you're going to get. And thinner strings, thinner gauges that are shorter, those will give you the higher pitches. So when we stretch a string out, when we're tuning it, you'll hear that pitch going higher. And then when we shorten the string, what we're doing, we're putting our finger down on the fretboard, and that's shortening the string. So that does make the pitch go higher, but if you stretch the string, obviously, you're going to get higher tones out of it. All right, so one more off of there. I use a .016 on my middle string. And then we'll get the melody string off of here. And I'm going to show you this one up close. So the question arises, how do I know when it's time to change my strings? A couple of things. First of all, I showed you how my dulcimer started to sound a little weird. I got some wolf tones, some weirdness going on there. If your dulcimer is not staying in tune very well, that is a good clue that it's time to change your strings. Because what happens is these strings, when they're attached to the instrument, they vibrate. Every sound that we hear is got a vibration. It travels through the air. The way strings work is when they're tightened up to pitch and we pluck them, they vibrate back and forth. Now, if you were to do this on a piece of concrete, these strings wouldn't make a lot of sound by themselves. But when you attach it to an instrument that was designed to be basically an amplifier for strings with a wooden soundboard, the vibration of the string by way of the bridge translates into a vibration that then the vibration of the string matches the soundboard of the instrument matches the vibration of the string, and it amplifies that sound. And if you've got 3 strings, it amplifies it by 3 times. So what happens is when we get a lot of gunk on the strings, as you can see here, there is, in fact, if I do this well, you can actually see that I've got a lot of garbage coming off of the string going onto my fingers. So if you are playing your instrument and you bring your fingers up and they're all got skid marks on them, chances are you probably need to go ahead and get that off of there, because the way these strings are built is typically there's a metal in the middle, a core of the string that's either steel, nickel, brass, nylon, or gut are the most popular ones. And then there is another piece of material that's wound around the string. And so because it's wound around, it's not a continuous piece, there are ridges, and it creates a texture. And that texture is a perfect place to capture oils off of your fingers, which attracts dirt and dust from the air, and whatever else. In time, those little bits of texture get filled up with this gunk, and the string doesn't vibrate nearly as good as it should. And that contributes to a dull sound. The strings don't vibrate nearly as well. They don't resonate, and they don't stay in tune very well either. So your first clue is if it starts to look pretty bad, oh my goodness, look at that. That is embarrassing. If they start to look like that, rip them off and put some new strings on. Oh my goodness. All right. So I talked about taking care of your strings and what can you do to make them last long as possible. Well, I have a microfiber cloth that I use, and this is kind of over the top, but you can get a smaller one. And I'll show you how to use this after the fact, but when you get all your strings off your instrument, this is a perfect time to give it a little TLC. And that means just to kind of wipe it down fully, get all over the fretboard. In fact, if you've got the Howard feed and wax, as I've suggested in other videos, it's a good time when you're changing your strings to put a coat of that on there, let it sit for 20 minutes and buff it off. That conditions the wood and takes care of it, keeps everything nice and supple, so that you can avoid having cracks from temperature changes, the wood doesn't dry out. I kind of beat my Dulcimers up. Thankfully, Fullcraft Instruments is very nice about making new ones for me. So once you give it a nice cleaning, this microfiber cloth is also great for wiping down your strings after you play them. Not only the top of the strings, but underneath as well. And if you do that, you can actually extend the life of your strings by quite a lot. All right, so let me show you the difference between these two strings. This is a .026 bronze wound, which is the thicker string. That's going to be my bass string. And then I've got a .014, which is noticeably thinner. It's also wound. You can see the rest of the wrapping down there at the very, very end next to the ball. And that is going to be my melody string. And then I've got a .016 that I'm going to pull out of that package down there, and that's my middle string. So let me go ahead and start. And we're going to feed these strings through the nut and the bridge and the frets, at the nut and the bridge in these little slots here. Now most of these are snug, so it doesn't matter what order you put these strings on, but it might be a good idea to wait until you've got at least the bass and the melody string on before you really tighten them, because sometimes these are a little loose in the slots. If you tighten the bass string down by itself, it may make the nut or the bridge lift up, making it a bit more difficult to get those strings in place. So I'm just going to take the ball end, I'm going to put it right over the top of the post. And the way I do it, and I don't know if there's any right or wrong way necessarily to start this process, but the key thing is when you're putting the strings on, you want to keep the slack up as much as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and feed it through the gear for my bass. And the technique I use is I'm going to put my finger down here just on the other side of the 3rd fret. And you can see with my fingers I am allowing myself to pull that up, but I'm also keeping tension between the fingers and the post. I'm going to keep it on that post there. I'm not going to worry about threading it through here just yet because sometimes it ends up popping out, but I'll try. And then we're going to go ahead and start tuning or turning the gear. Now if you've got a flat head, this is really easy to do. You want to make sure that the string goes around the inside as opposed to the outside and have this distance, this direction going from the nut to the gear as straight as possible. If I were to go around the outside, it would turn and create a lot of pressure against the nut. So I'm going around the inside this direction clockwise for the tuners on the right side, and for the tuners on the left side I'll go into a counterclockwise direction, and again keep that string path as straight as possible. Now while I'm doing this, I'm keeping that slack up, because as the string winds around the tuning machine, it is making itself nice and firm there and secure. If you don't take up the slack, however, it won't be as tight as it needs to be, and every once in a while as you're tuning, the string will slip as it tightens up and cinches up a bit more. And that can be disconcerting if you're playing in the middle of a tune and all of a sudden you go way out of tune because you didn't keep the tension up. When I get down to a certain point, I want to make sure that that string is fed right into the slot. And then I'll go ahead by hand and I'll get to right about this point. And I've never let go of this. Nothing sucks worse than having this pop off. All of your tension's lost over here, and then you got to either do it over again or deal with that retuning in the middle of your piece thing. While still holding this, I'm going to do a little pre-stretching. New strings are going to stretch out over time, and nylon strings are really, really bad about this. It takes a long time for the nylon strings to stretch out, so you're retuning all the time. So with steel strings, what I like to do is pre-stretch them so that I don't have to do a lot of retuning right off the bat. Eventually those strings will settle in and you won't have any issues. Now don't worry, you can apply a lot of pounds of pressure to a string before it breaks. So really get in there and always make sure you're holding in those strings and keeping the tension up. Okay, that feels pretty good to me. I'm gonna go ahead and finish it, getting it all the way down. When I feel it starting to really tighten on my fingers down there, then I'm gonna let go. And we've got the bass string on. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and do the melody string now. As I mentioned, if you've got a loose nut or bridge, this is a good way of keeping that from flipping around on you. So I'm gonna go ahead and attach this. Now I'm a 3-string player. I play 4-string equidistant sometimes, but not enough to warrant always having a double melody on my instrument. The post I want to use, if I'm a 3-string player, that's a single melody, it's going to be the inside post, not the outside one closest to me. And actually, now I look at it, I forget that this particular dulcimer is cut specifically just for the 3 strings. Most of my other dulcimers allow me to go ahead and go 4-string if I want to. So if you're going to do that and you've got the 2-string holes cut, the posts and the slots, go with the inner one, not the outer one. That just gives you a little bit more clearance to the outside edge of the fretboard. Okay, and I'm going to filter that, thread that right through here in the tuning gear. And I'm going to do the exact same thing I did before. Make sure that that ball end is secure. Get my finger down here about the 3rd fret, or it doesn't matter what fret you're at, as long as you can get a good amount of string pulled up so you can have that winding around the tuning gear. And then with my string winder, I'm going to make sure that the path of the string is the shortest path and the straightest path it can take. And that's going to be counterclockwise. Now if you've got a scroll head, it doesn't matter nearly as much because really we're talking about directions of up or down, over the peg or under the peg, and it doesn't matter nearly as much as going from side to side. But you might find with your scroll head that going in one direction or another is a little easier as far as getting the string to go around. So I'm going to keep that tension on that string while I take up the slack. And right when I get down to the point where I feel I'm almost at the end, I'm going to go ahead and pre-stretch them all the way down there. Now the height above the fretboard of the strings is called the action. You might have gotten a mountain dulcimer at some point where the action was very high, and when you pressed down on the fretboard, it hurt your fingers because you had to press down so far. Well, not only does that hurt, but also remember that we make the string shorter by pressing down on the fretboard to the left of a fret. Then the new support point, instead of it being the nut, becomes that fret. we've shortened the string, we've made the pitch higher. Every time we move our finger down, we're making that string long again, and the pitch gets lower. Well, if you have to push down too far, like right now, where my finger is, that's a stupid high action. But if I push down and actually make contact with the fretboard, it's going to stretch more than it was engineered to stretch to. And when I do that, it's actually going to go out of tune. It's going to go sharp. It'll be longer than it really is supposed to be. So a high action doesn't actually just hurt. It actually makes you go out of tune. So it's a good idea, first of all, to make sure that your action is set properly. Second, depending on what your VSL is, or your scale length, you'll want to experiment with different gauge strings in order to come up with a nice, balanced average feel across all the strings. I find that if you're going for DAD tuning, you got 28-inch scale length. For example, let's say I'm using 0.026 on the bass string, 0.016 on the middle string, and 0.012 on the melody string. Let me say 0.014, like I'm using right now. I have my reasons for wanting to go there. And I'm put on the screen here the link for a string tension calculator, where you can basically set it up for 3-string mountain dulcimer. You can put in the kind of string you're using. You can put in the gauge of the string, the material of the string, and how you're going to tune it, in what octave. And then it'll tell you how many pounds of pressure are going to be on that string. And if you put in your current numbers for your strings and find that you've got 28 pounds of pressure on the bass string, 22 pounds of pressure on the middle string, 30 pounds of pressure on the melody string, that means if you push down with equal pressure across all 3 strings, you're going to get 3 different pressure points, and that means that one of those strings, more than likely, is going to go a little more out of tune than the rest of them. So the idea is to make sure that the pounds of pressure, the tension, is equal or average across all the strings. 0.014 would make me a little uneven, but I like to have a bit more strength on my melody string. But you'll find in this tension calculator, if you put these numbers in, that if you go 0.026, 0.016, 0.012, that there is an average of 22 pounds per pressure across all 3 strings. And not only does it feel right for you, but it's going to sound right for you too. Also want to mention that when you're tuning in DAD, your D is a D3, that's the 3rd octave, and your middle string is a 3 as well. That's going to be the D and the A below middle C. Your melody string is an octave above your bass string, it's D4, which is the D right above middle C. C4 is middle C. So that's handy to know as well, because these strings with lengths and gauges were all engineered to be effective within a certain range. So knowing what your VSL is and knowing what your tuning is going to help you fit within that. Many of us discovered the hard way. If we've got a 0.015 on the melody string and we're trying to tune the melody to E5 or higher, what happens? We end up breaking that string very easily because it's a thicker gauge, which means it's got more tension, and we're applying a lot more tension to it as well. The melody string has got the most amount of tension out of all 3 of the strings, the string courses on the mountain dulcimer. So this string calculator will save you lots of money on broken strings and possibly save you from having a heart attack from having them break in your face all the time. All right, I got one more string to put on here. It's the middle string. And as I mentioned, I really recommend a 0.016. That takes up a lot of the slack that people tend to find on that middle string. And I'm going to go put that post right there. Feed it up the middle. And I got options, baby. I got options. I'm going to go there. Okay. I always double check to make sure the post is on there so it doesn't fly off. Go ahead and take that up a little bit. Going counterclockwise on this side of the flathead and bringing it around. Now we talked a little bit about the ridges that happen because of the winding around the core of the string. And those ridges can cause squeaking. A lot of people use things like finger ease and different types of oil so they can glide across those strings a little bit. My personal opinion about that is using a lighter touch is actually a lot better than using these materials because it's free to use a lighter touch. You'll spend a lot of money on finger ease and stuff over the years. And also that stuff basically just, if you spray it on or you wipe it on like fast fret, it really is gunking up the winding material and it makes your strings go south a lot quicker. So if you want good sounding strings, you want to try and keep them as naked as possible and wipe them down when you're done playing. But don't spray a bunch of stuff on there or wipe stuff on there because that just makes them gross. And then you're spending more money on strings. Okay, so I've got these tensioned, but they're not all the way up to tension. So before I do any trimming of these things here, I'm going to go ahead and get these things tuned up by applying the tuner and get us up to DAD, starting with the bass string. When you're tuning, you want to make sure that you can hear the pitch going up while it's vibrating, while it's sounding. That's putting the least amount of stress on the string. Now, it's not the case that you're going to break a string freshly placed on your dulcimer, but if they are not vibrating, if you simply move the tuning gears without plucking them first, there is actually a lot more stress going on the instrument. And think about it. Skyscrapers and bridges were built to move in the case of high winds, earthquakes, things like that. Things that move don't break. Things that are very rigid do break. So always make sure you can actually hear the sound of your strings going up or going down, and that will lessen the chance of them busting in your face and making you freak out. Okay, now I'm going to do the melody string. This is the one that gives a lot of people pause because we have so far to go to reach that octave. Start making tuning face. Now these will stretch, so I will get them to DAD and then I'll retune them a couple more times. And then the middle string, the least amount of tension, very easy to get that up to A. Now, if you don't have a tuner, you don't have to use a tuner. If you're not planning on playing with anybody else, you don't have to be in concert pitch. All you need to do at that point is pluck the bass string until you start to get a really, really nice sound. This could be at, C even, and not necessarily D. Once it sounds good on the bass string, then just go to the 4th fret, pluck that note, that's going to be your A, and then tune your middle string to match the 4th fret on the bass string. And then tune your melody string to match the bass string an octave higher. You can also go at the 7th fret and get the exact same pitch. And when they're matched, you're all good to go. Now they're holding their tuning pretty well because they're not stretching out. I did a little pre-stretching on them, but they're still not quite perfect. So let me go ahead and do a little fine tuning here. Bring that bass string up. And then we'll bring up the middle string. And there's no particular order you need to do these in, like when you're putting lug nuts on a car wheel. But sometimes I do like to go the outer strings first and then the middle string. Now compare that sound to the sound I had at the beginning of the episode. Listen to how much sustain there is. Listen to how bright and lively and energetic those strings are. Now listen to the melody string by itself. Remember that horrible, awful buzzing, clanging we had going on? Check this out. Smooth and beautiful. And all I had to do was simply change the strings. Oh, there's nothing like the sound of fresh strings. Now that I've done that, I've got this little mess of things happening here, and anybody who's ever poked their finger with an exposed end to a string knows that tain't funny. So that's why the wire cutters are here. Get right up close to the edge of the string, right next to the tuning gear, and get that off of there, and you are saving blood. It's a good thing. Let's do this one here. I'm always careful, especially those of us who are, wearing bifocals. Make sure you're cutting the right wire. It's kind of like a bomb. You don't want to cut the one that's running down the fretboard. Look very carefully, make sure you got it. Snip, it's off of there. Now let's say you don't have snips and you got this big thing hanging out here and you don't want it hanging out there because if you go to tune it, it's going to poke you. Here's a neat little trick. Take your pick or take a coin, pinch the string between your thumb and whatever you're using, coin or pick, and then using the hard edge, the straight edge or whatever you're using, force that against the string, apply pressure, and get it to where it's like an L until finally you get a pigtail. Now you'd really have to try to get your finger in there and poke that. And then of course later on, if you really don't want pigtails all over your headstock, you can go ahead and clip that. And there you have it. Ooh, well, I'm gonna have to retune, but that's okay because they're fresh strings and they won't break. Thank you very much for watching this. And thank you very much to all of my patrons on Patreon for all of the wonderful questions that get stored up in my head and result in episodes of Dulcimerica just like this. Of course, if you pay $5 a month or $50.40 for an annual pass for the year, you get lots of behind-the-scenes stuff and weekly content designed specifically to help you play mountain dulcimer, Native American flute, ukulele, and to understand music theory. There are free samples of everything I offer. All my CDs, books, videos, and tablature are available, and samples are available at patreon.com/BingFutch. Check out the open house section. I'll be back next week with who knows what, but hopefully it'll help you learn to play the mountain dulcimer even better than you are now. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time. Yes, baby.